Welcome to the Presilience podcast, Ep.3, with Janine Mahoney. I'm your host, Joe Saunders. This episode is brought to you by R2S Security, the specialised security and risk division of the Risk2 Solution Group. R2S Security has been delivering a wide range of security and risk-related solutions for over 15 years. R2S Security boasts a broad base of clients and have successfully delivered hundreds of audits and assessments on a diverse portfolio of assets, people and operations, along with training projects for all levels of government, as well as small, medium and large enterprise. If you have a security need, R2S Security have a solution. To find out more, please visit R2S Security online at www.risk2solution.com. That's www.risk2solution.com. My guest for this episode is Janine Mahoney. Janine has a long career in the family violence sector and has a proven record in the design and delivery of innovative solutions that have been recognised and awarded for their level of excellence. Janine is a thought leader with an unquestionable commitment to ensuring that people remain in the centre of strategy and innovation design. Janine was the founder and CEO of the Safe Futures Foundation, one of Victoria's largest and most innovative family violence services. She's also served for 6 years as the board chair of Domestic Violence Victoria. Given the horrific events in Brisbane last week, we felt it was important to interview Janine to give her insights into what can be done to address the scourge of family violence. This is an important topic, and I thank you for taking the time to listen. We would like to dedicate this episode to Hannah Clark and her children. All right, Janine, thanks for joining us on the Presilience podcast. It's great to finally sit down with you and have a chat. We've been meaning to do it for a while, and it's finally happening.
Thanks so much, Joe, for having me. It's something I've been looking forward to and exploring some of the issues relating to family violence that you and I have talked about before.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, it's a timely discussion with a tragedy that's just happened in Brisbane this past week. But before we dive into that, for listeners that may not know much about you, other than the intro that I've just given, could you sort of talk through your background as it relates to domestic and family violence and the work you've done in that space?
Yeah, sure. Look, I've been in the family violence sector for a very long time. I actually did my thesis at university on family violence responses, and that was when I was 20 years old, and a very long time ago. Refuges had just been opened and they weren't even funded at that point. So I've been right through the process of the sector just beginning to emerge through to where we are now. I went from university, though, into working in government, and I was part of the team as a program advisor and then the state manager for the team that was delivering the funding for family violence and homelessness services. And it was a great complementary insight that I got into how we need to work collaboratively. From government, though, I went back out into working in the sector, and through a number of smaller family violence agencies, I saw that there were inherent challenges within the system. And I looked to, about 8 years ago, set up an organisation that could explore new ways of working and new ways of looking at how do we, protect women and children, build an inclusive community, and ultimately then ensure that their safety and wellbeing was a priority for the community. So I set up the Safe Futures Foundation, and through that was very fortunate to have an amazing team that enabled me to really look at different ways of delivering services. About 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to move into consulting and into a space of consulting with both government and corporate organisations to look at better ways of building inclusion, safety and wellbeing. And I set up a new consulting model called Impact Architecture, which is bringing together social impact and business architecture. And that framework looks at placing people in the centre and ensuring their families and the communities then are wrapped around them to make sure that they get the very best experiences and outcomes possible.
Right, it's a very concise summary of what has been a very impactful career that you've had. Look, let's jump on to the actual topic. Yeah, we've been meaning to do this for months, but as we mentioned, it's fairly topical given the tragedy that's just happened with Hannah Clark and her children being murdered in Brisbane this week in what certainly from all accounts appears to be a horrific case of domestic and family violence. And there's many people out there that are questioning what can we do, what needs to happen to prevent these sorts of issues from happening. And I'd just like to, I guess, open up the discussion for you as an expert. What are your initial thoughts? Like, what have we been crying out for? What do we need to do to prevent these sorts of issues from happening?
I think, Joe, what I'd like to say first is some of the thoughts that have come to me over the last week as I've listened to what's been unfolding on the television and in the media. And the first thing clearly is like the heartfelt understanding that I have for Hannah's family and what they would be going through, the shock, the distress, and the total lack of disbelief that this could actually happen to someone they love. I've, it been through in my career, having to go through 7 murder trials, 5 women and 2 children. And I wasn't family. I was someone that knew these women. But the trauma that sits with not just the person living with the family violence and their children, but their broader circle of family and friends, it is just incredibly difficult. And then when that, total loss of life occurs, like has happened with Hannah and her children, it is just a complete sense of helplessness and what could I have done and what could we have done differently that sits. The second thing that has quite distressed me as I've been listening to the media is some of the commentary around, what we can do into the future. I don't believe that, it's necessary for me to comment on the existing solutions at the moment, but the future and some suggestions of screening all men leaving relationships, I can't comprehend how A, we could do that, or B, how we would actually manage a system like that. We cannot at the moment manage to share information between those tasked with a duty of care to protect the survivors that we know of right now. How on earth are we going to be able to provide an information sharing system or a response model that could deal with something like that? And are we then putting all men into a category of saying, well, we believe all men are potentially offenders? And I think that that's a very, very dangerous assumption for a community to make. So firstly, I would never endorse a solution like that. But we're also hearing lots more about how we need to educate people, children in schools and the community around, respect. And absolutely we do. And I would never say that that's not a good idea, but it's not going to stop what's happening at the moment, which is an incredible epidemic of violence. And with that violence sits in the background a huge amount of control and abuse that we really don't talk much about. We see in the media, it hits the front page when there's a serious assault or a death, but behind that is often months and years of controlling and abusive behaviours that the person has lived with, and that has done untold damage to that person's well-being. So I think we need to absolutely educate and talk about respect, but there's a much greater piece of education that we need to look at, and that is twofold. Education around how to keep people safe and how to ensure that they're aware and informed and can make educated decisions. And this is not just the people that are living that experience of family violence, but also the people that are first responders and frontline professionals, giving them the knowledge as well, because I don't think a lot of people realise the enormous risk that sits with those people in their jobs, and they need to be given absolutely every piece of support and information and training that as a community we can possibly give them, because without those workers we're going to not be able to ever protect those that are at risk. So the training that we and education we need to look at is actual practical skills and practical solutions around what to do for people that are at risk right now. We need to look to the future. We need to change attitudes, but most importantly, right now, we need to be able to change the way the system works and to turn that around.
Absolutely. And I think in most problems of this nature, whether it's in this space or others, there is a long-term play with a cultural change or an attitudinal change, which is realistically takes generations to occur. And it's not saying that we don't need to start that now, because it has to start somewhere. But we also have to look at the immediate situation, those that are at risk now, not just their children or grandchildren.
Absolutely. Like we've forgotten for so long the children. And I know when a child dies, we do hear about that in the media. But Joe, what I've seen after decades of working in the sector, and it's showing my age, but that's like 35 years now. The majority of people in our community that are living with family violence are children. 3/4 of the clients that come to family violence services are children. That's well over 1 million children in our community that we know of that are reported to be living with family violence. And we all know that there's a huge amount of people in the community that don't report or don't come forward. And those numbers of children living every day with that fear and the impact of that trauma is absolutely enormous. And we need to be starting to give children visibility and a voice so that they too can have an opportunity to be safe, but also to have the community understand that that experience of family violence very, very often triggers PTSD, and that trauma impact stays with people for life unless they're given an opportunity to recover. And a statistic that I was shocked with when I heard it, and it's become an area I've looked at quite closely, is that 90 to 95% of our prison populations, the common thread between them is not just crime. It's child abuse and family violence as young people or children. And they are traumatized. They are living with things such as depression and anxiety, addictions to substances. And in this scenario, most importantly, very often they're holding a significant amount of anger and rage that they absolutely do not understand. So if we can start to also look at identification of trauma at the earliest possible point and recovery, then that is going to be also giving us a step forward to changing this story. We don't just need to look, though, at the metropolitan communities. Like, this is an issue right across Australia, and another invisible group of people are often those that live in rural and remote communities. They're not only isolated because of the family violence, they are isolated because of distance and circumstance. We've also got members of our community that have barriers to accessing support, such as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, those with a disability. The list goes on. We need to make sure that how we look at providing these responses offers accessibility across the board to anybody that needs it. And I think that that's where we really, really start needing to look at the technology opportunities. We've talked about technology enabling control and abuse, but what we need to do also is flip that and look at the enormous benefits that technology can offer in creating personal safety and connected communities. The opportunities provided by telehealth and remote witness can be expanded significantly to include a whole range of other online face-to-face supports for people that desperately need it.
Actually, if you could just expand upon that a little bit, for those that may not be part of the sector or haven't had much interaction, they may not know what sort of technological solutions we're talking about. For your money, what are the ones that you think are really the future or provide the most upside in the next couple of years?
Okay, well, there's options for technology in a range of spaces. What I just spoke about now with online, we can offer things such as online risk assessments and safety planning that then enable the communities that support people to share information. And I don't mean willy-nilly sharing of personal and private information, but as a community, we're governed by a duty of care. So anything that gets identified as around risk, we need to be able to permission that sharing between the people that need to know. I think, the Royal Commission into Family Violence in Victoria, the inquest into Luke Batty's death, the reports that have been presented to Parliament here in Queensland, all specifically talk about information sharing as being an absolute priority. And the only way that we can do that safely and securely with the permissions embedded that we require is through technology. I guess the other things that I've found personally in responses that I've developed and trialed is the use of safety and security technology. I set up with Victoria Police over a number of years, and we went into a great deal of depth around ensuring that we ticked all of the boxes, that this response would work for people that were experiencing violence, the frontline police officers, the districts and the command of police and family violence services. And what we did was look at how do we keep women and children safe in their own homes. The vast majority of people who leave relationships actually have a home, but it's not safe. And many of them are forced into homelessness, into motels, refuges, homelessness services. The pilot that we ran actually looked at keeping people in their homes. And over 3 years, we put 160 high to extreme risk families through that response. They were all referred by police as being at, risk every day. So these women were often calling police on a daily basis with breaches of intervention orders. The thing with it was, though, when you actually call police and they come to breach, most of the time the offender has left. They know that with the demand of police called out, every 2 minutes in Australia, there's no way police have got the resources ever to get to every family violence call in an immediacy. So offenders know that, and they come, they, put fear into the lives of their families, and then they leave. By the time police are there, the evidence is gone, and basically what remains is he said, she said to the court. And of course, without evidence, the courts are unable to actually take any further action. What we looked at was using technology as a deterrence. So firstly, police telling offenders that their former partner was in a program where if they breached, there would be admissible evidence and they would be taken to court, they would be prosecuted, and in all likelihood, it would be successful because the evidence would be high quality admissible evidence. It was also explained to these offenders that if that occurred and the prosecution was successful and they were convicted, what was once a civil matter with an intervention or domestic violence order would become a criminal offence, and they would be then liable to all of what occurs with a criminal offence. It would be public knowledge. It would impact on their ability to be employed. It would be limiting in where they can travel. Many overseas countries do not let you travel there if you have a crime against a person recorded against your name. So all of a sudden, a consequence sits to the person who's creating that fear and harm. So we had 160 families being breached every day, $900 to $1,000 spent on a police call out each time, to actually having 97% of those families never creating the need for a police call out again. So the breaches stopped and the women and children were able to remain safely in their home. So what we actually put into that response was we did comprehensive property audits to look at what were the risk factors, and we put CCTV cameras in that would be able to live stream and securely store the images as admissible evidence. We also put in place a personal safety device for the woman where if she was at any risk, she could immediately activate the personal safety device, which would then live stream audio and GPS location. For me, it's very exciting that there's a product now on the market that is world leading that also now live streams video. So you've got every avenue of evidence collection available, but it also immediately verifies for the monitoring centre and then police that there is an incident. It enabled police to do a response with a priority approach and be informed by the monitoring centre on their way there what was happening as the event unfolded. So this model of use of technology for safety and security was evaluated and funded by government on its third trial, and it was found to be incredibly successful, and it was recommended for funding. It was evaluated yet again through the Royal Commission into Family Violence, and it was evaluated by the Commonwealth Government and the Prime Minister's Department, and funding has rolled out across states and territories from both the Commonwealth and the states to implement this response model right across the country. Unfortunately, and the comment I'm about to make will possibly not be popular with many people, but I'm going to make it anyway, that funding has not been used at all in the way that it was intended. The model that we set up with great diligence with police has been modified and changed, and the accountabilities and the specifications for technology haven't been followed. And instead of a national framework that can actually really guide professionals and frontline and first responders, has become something that's different in every part of the, not just every part of the country, but in different states and territories, it's different in regions. And so the consistency has meant that it really hasn't been implemented at all. And it's very, very sad and distressing for me to know that we have a model that worked so well that is now not being utilised in the way that it was intended by the politicians who funded it. And hopefully we can re-look at that model and re-look at those evaluations and say this is what we need. After all of this time in family violence, I absolutely believe deterrence models are critical. Why would we leave people in a state where they're at risk and unsafe until the worst possible point and respond at that time of crisis, rather than identify risks at the earliest possible point and then look to deter offenders from committing those crimes? Having a crisis response allows us to have a tolerance to risk that is far too high. There is no accountabilities for monitoring those risks and mitigating them where there is in a deterrence model. The deterrence model focuses highly and at all times on the risks and then ensures that mitigators are put into place. I think that, when you're taking it from the position of the person who's living with this rather than the position of organisations or the community in general, every single time the person will want the model that deters offenders, not just the model that enables a fast response if something goes wrong. We only want that fast response for the smallest number of people where no matter what we do, nothing's going to work, and we must then get immediate action. For everybody else, if we can put something in place that keeps people safe and also enables the community to feel that they have an understanding of each individual circumstance, then I truly believe we have a very, very strong obligation to do that.
Absolutely. And I think if we look at that through the lens of any other risk management discipline, we would never be endorsing, or let's just be really good at reacting and responding. We always try to strive for prevention, and I think it has to be the approach. Just as we close out, I'd like to get your thoughts on something. We nearly always talk about this topic through the lens of government intervention and government funding and authorities and policing and policies and allocation of budget and so on. What do you think the role of private business is in the realm of family and domestic violence in terms of being able to provide support or various structures to assist their staff members that may be experiencing domestic and family violence in the home?
Okay, so I think it's twofold. We have got a lot of people in the safety and security industry that are absolute experts. Their qualifications, their knowledge and their experience around risk and mitigation, as you just mentioned, is second to none in this country. We have got some of the world's best experts, and at the moment we're not utilising that knowledge. So I think there is an enormous opportunity for the bringing together of government, community and corporates to create shared value, to create solutions that not only are able to deliver social impact but economic impact as well. Like actually make sure that what we do is ensuring the very, very best outcomes for the people in our community that are at risk, but also ensuring that the money that as a community, as a government, we spend to ensure that that happens is well spent, that it's not going to responses being set up by people who don't have the level of expertise that the security and safety industry do, and thus, with no ill intent, are setting up models that maybe don't work. Just a side note on that though, there are, I think, people in the industry that may not truly understand family violence. And so the critical point is actually bringing together government with security industry experts who also have a deep understanding of the risks posed by those experiencing family violence. So that's one side of it. The other side is that we often categorize or label people who are experiencing family violence as potentially not being in the workforce. What I know is that enormous numbers of women work who live with this control, abuse and violence. In fact, studies have shown that it's around 70% of those women are in the workplace. So when you look at what is workplace law and the considerations of safety, health and wellbeing for employees, I truly believe that there is an absolute responsibility on the part of employers to ensure that their staff are protected. So we think that women are unsafe in the community or in their homes, but in fact, many, many women are targeted in the workplace. They are receiving the threatening, harassing calls at the workplace. Often their phones and the confidential information held on laptops is hacked into by the offenders. There's threats to harm both those women and their work colleagues. So the women are often forced into a position where they are taking sick leave. So as a consequence, profitability and productivity is reduced for the workplace. They're using up sick leave that they might need for other reasons for themselves and their kids. And the worst case scenario is that many, many women are then forced to leave their jobs because of the risks posed to themselves and their colleagues in the workplace. I think with some really simple, connected solutions, workplaces can make an enormous difference for these people that are vulnerable and at risk. But in doing so, the solutions they put in place will sit right across the workplace and offer enormous benefit to all employees around improving what are work-safe obligations. So really focused around ensuring the safety and health and well-being of all employees. So I think that if we look at the corporate world, they have so much opportunity to, put in place solutions that in so many ways will make the community a better and safer place for people to live and work.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you very much, Janine. Really do appreciate it. It's been a great and very important episode, and I hope we get to do it again.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and I'll look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Thank you once again to Janine Mahoney for sharing with us her knowledge and perspective on this horrible topic of family violence. Now, in response to this tragedy that we referred to, as well as International Women's Day coming up next week, we have made the decision to make our general security and safety awareness training program available for free online. So if you head to www.r2s.academy and look up the GSAT course, General Security Safety Awareness Training course, delivered by our group CEO, Dr. Gav Schneider. That is available for free for the entire month of March. So if you are interested in participating in our award-winning GSAT course, it is free for all of March as a token of our support for the elimination of violence against all people. For any information on our services, including our violence management practice, please check out our website at www.risk2solution.com. risk2solution.com. Thank you. We'll talk to you again next time.